In the suffocating jungles of World War II, the U.S. Marines faced an invisible enemy that modern firepower couldn't touch. 11 men killed by a ghost in the trees. Their last desperate order: send in one man, not a platoon, not with a machine gun, but a 24-year-old from the Ozarks armed with nothing but a hunting rifle and a single impossible mission: to enter the green hell alone and hunt down 11 master snipers before they picked his entire battalion apart. This is the true story of a shot that defied every rule of war, a mission so suicidal. History says it should have failed, yet changed the entire course of a brutal campaign. Watch until the very end to discover how one man, one rifle, and unimaginable courage silenced an entire forest of killers. I have a question for you. Pay close attention, because the answer is hidden somewhere in this story against 11 hidden snipers. With the entire machine of modern warfare failing, what single, seemingly useless advantage did John Fulcher have that no one else saw? What did he understand that the rule book didn't keep watching? The answer is here, and when we reveal it, it'll make it clear. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The 21st of January 1944, Cape Gloucester, New Britain. The jungle does not fight fair. It swallows sound, bends light, and turns movement into suicide. For the men of the 1st of Marching Division, holding a perimeter of stinking mud and razor-sharp kunai grass, the enemy was not across a line. He was above them in the past 96 hours. 11 Marines had dropped, a single precise rifle shot cracking through the wet air. One moment a man was drinking from his canteen, the next he was dead in the mud, a hole in his helmet. There were no muzzle flashes, no charges, no battle cries, only the shot and the silence that followed. The snipers were not soldiers. They were a pathology, a sickness in the canopy. And the standard cure artillery barrages, machine gun sweeps of the tree line had failed. They were wasting thousands of rounds to kill leaves. By every known rule of modern warfare, this was a problem solved by volume. You counter sniper fire with overwhelming, suppressing firepower. You use mortars, you call in naval gunfire. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. You do not send one man, especially not a Archasi Jan-Year-Jan-old PFC from the Ozarks named John Fulcher, and you absolutely do not send him out with a weapon the armor is officially classified as a hunting rifle. The MED, a specialized sniper variant of the Garand, was still months from deployment. What Fulcher carried was a personal weapon. A 30.06 Springfield M1903A, scoped not with a military-issue Untertel, but with a commercially purchased Weaver Sensenni. It was a sniper system built by a hillbilly, not the War Department. His superiors had tolerated it the way one tolerates a lucky charm. It was a toy, a sentimental affectation. In the closed-in quarters, hell of the Pacific, where engagements happened at century yards, a bolts-and action rifle was a death sentence. But the jungle of Cape Gloucester had rewritten the rules. Engagement distance was not 30 yards. It was 300. The enemy was not in a trench. He was 90 feet in the air, lashed to a banyan tree wrapped in vines. You couldn't suppress what you couldn't see. The battalion was being dissected. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Nerve by nerve, and the machine of war had no tool for the operation. Command had run out of doctrine. All they had left was a desperate gamble and a boy with a scope. That morning, the order was given. Fulcher was to go out alone. He was to enter the green maze where 11 men had just died and hunt the hunters. It was not a tactical decision. It was an act of sacrificial logic. They were sending a single slow-firing rifle against 11 hidden veteran killers. The mathematical conclusion was foregone. He would be a target the moment he left the perimeter. He would die in the mud, and his pretty rifle would become a war trophy for a Japanese officer. History insists this should have ended there. At 0630, John Fulcher checked the tension on his scope mounts, loaded a 5-round stripper clip, and stepped into the green wall. To understand the absurdity of that order, you must first understand the machine that gave it. The United States Marine Corps in 1944 was a blunt instrument forged for frontal assault. Its doctrine was written in the fire and steel of Belleau Wood, refined in the crucible of Guadalcanal. Advance under supporting fire. Close with the enemy, destroy him. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Precision was the job of artillery spotters and naval gunners. The individual rifleman was a component of volume. John Fulcher was a malfunctioning component. He had arrived at Camp Lejeune with his Springfield already modified. While other men zeroed their standard-issue M-phase. Fulcher was on the known distance range, methodically tightening his groups with hand-loaded match ammunition. The armorers scoffed. The rifle was obsolete. The scope was a civilian toy, vulnerable to humidity and shock. His platoon sergeant told him to ditch the goddamn squirrel gun and learn to shoot a real weapon. The M1 Garand was a masterpiece of industrial warfare, 8 rounds of semi-automatic fury that could dominate a battlefield. Fulcher's bolt-action Springfield was a relic from the last war. In a firefight, the man with the Garand could put 10 rounds downrange in the time it took Fulcher to work his bolt. Twice. The conclusion was inescapable. He was handicapping himself. But Fulcher's logic came from a different world. He wasn't thinking in terms of firefights, he was thinking in terms of shots. A single perfect intersection of math, physics, and nerve. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Head learned it hunting white-tailed deer in the Missouri hills, where a missed shot meant an empty winter. There was no spray and pray, there was one opportunity, one bullet, and absolute stillness before the trigger broke. The Marine Corps saw a rifleman. Fulcher saw himself as an instrument. This philosophical schism meant nothing on the rifle range. But when his battalion landed at Cape Gloucester, they entered a terrain that invalidated the textbook. This was not a battlefield. It was a three-dimensional, claustrophobic labyrinth of roots, mud, and colossal rainforest trees. Visibility ceased at 20 yards. The Japanese 25th Regiment, veterans of China, had not built a defensive line. They had built an ecosystem of death. Machine gun nests were woven into the roots of trees. Snipers ascended before dawn into a world of dappled light and shifting shadows, becoming not soldiers but features of the landscape. The American response-massed automatic weapons fire. Mortar barrages did nothing but announce their position and waste ammunition. The snipers would wait for the barrage to end, for the Marines to think the area was clear, and then another man would fall. The psychological corrosion was more lethal than the bullets. Men were afraid to move, to drink, to look up. The battalion was becoming paralyzed in place. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. And so, faced with a problem that brute force could not solve, the machine made an illogical choice. It reached for its malfunctioning component. The order given to PFC John Fulcher was not born of tactical genius. It was born of exhausted desperation. They were not sending a sniper. They were throwing a pebble at a dragon, hoping by some miracle to hit it in the eye. Fulcher's first move defied every principle of infantry survival. He did not advance along a covered route. He did not seek overlapping fields of fire. He stopped, 50 yards beyond the ragged Marine perimeter. He found a low, rotting log half sunk in the black mud of a creek bed. It offered no cover from the front or sides to any observer. It was a death trap. But Fulcher was not thinking like an infantryman. He was thinking like a hunter. The log provided a stable, flat rest for his rifle's forend. The creek bed carved a shallow lane of sight through the densest undergrowth. And crucially, it was a place no rational Marine would ever choose to defend. It was, therefore, a place the enemy might not think to watch. He settled in, the stink of decay and damp earth filling his nostrils. The jungle was a cacophony of bird shrieks, insect drones, the constant drip of water from leaves. He filtered it out. His world shrank to the circle of his weaver scope. He did not scan for a man. A man would be invisible. He scanned for the mistake, a straight line among the chaotic vines, a patch of color that didn't belong. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The faintest gleam of metal catching a sliver of light. This was a game of microscopic patience. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to shift the cramps building in his legs. A bead of sweat traced a path from his temple to his jawline. He ignored it. Movement was detection. Detection was death. The Japanese snipers were masters of this. They could remain motionless for 12 hours, urinating into bottles tied to their legs. Fulcher was the amateur. He had one advantage they did not anticipate. They were hunting for movement. He was hunting for stillness. For 2 hours. Nothing. Then, a flicker. At 230 yards, high in the sprawling canopy of a moss-covered banyan tree, something broke the pattern. It wasn't a face. It was a subtle, dark rectangular shape against a background of green and brown. A rifle stock. It was oriented toward the Marine perimeter. Fixed, waiting. The sniper was a part of the tree. Fulcher's own position, however, was now horrifically exposed. To take the shot, he had to raise himself up just enough to achieve a sight picture. In doing so, he would silhouette himself against the lighter mud of the creek bank. The math was brutal: one shot. If he missed, or merely wounded, the muzzle flash and movement would pinpoint his location for every enemy soldier in the grove. He would be dead before he could work the bolt to chamber a second round. He was not a hidden hunter anymore. He was about to become a perfect target. He exhaled slowly, letting half the air out of his lungs. His finger took up the slack in the trigger. The crosshairs found the center mass of the dark shape. He was no longer a man in a creek bed. He was a system of calculated pressures. The rifle fired. The crack of the .30-06 was a violent, singular thunderclap in the humid air. It did not echo. The jungle swallowed it whole in his scope. Fulcher saw the impact. The dark rectangular shape in the tree jolted violently, then seemed to unravel. A tangled mass of limbs, rifle, and cloth pitched forward, snagging on branches for a sickening moment before plummeting 90 feet to the jungle floor. The sound of the body hitting the ground was a distant, wet thud. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. There was no time for confirmation, no moment of grim satisfaction. The shot had torn the veil of silence from multiple points in the green gloom. Furious Japanese rifle fire erupted. Bullets snapped overhead and thwacked into the mud around his log. They were not aimed shots, they were area suppression fired toward the general source of the muzzle flash. Chips of rotten wood sprayed from the log beside his head. He was pinned. By the known rules, this was the end of the experiment. The lone sniper, position compromised, should now be overwhelmed. Fulcher did the counterintuitive. He did not retreat. He did not return fire. He pressed himself lower into the foul mud of the creek bed, becoming part of its contour. The incoming fire was wild, panicked. They knew a sniper was operating, but in the dense foliage they could not see him. They were firing at a memory of a sound. His heart hammered against his ribs. The urge to scramble back toward the Marine lines was a physical scream in his nerves. But movement now was a death sentence. He had to make them believe the shot had come from somewhere else, or that the shooter was already gone. He stayed frozen, mud seeping into his uniform, insects crawling across his neck. The enemy fire tapered off after a minute, then stopped. An eerie, waiting silence returned, thicker and more menacing than before. He had done the impossible. He had removed one of the 11 ghosts, but in doing so, he had transformed the hunting ground. He was no longer an unknown variable, he was a confirmed threat. The other 10 now knew a hunter was in the maze with them. Their discipline would be absolute, their patience infinite. They would be watching not just the marine perimeter, but the jungle itself for any sign of him. The tactical advantage of surprise was gone. He was deep inside contested territory, his position vaguely known, his line of retreat potentially observed. The mission had shifted. It was no longer a hunt. It was a duel, and he had just announced his presence to 10 masters of the craft. For the next hour, Fulcher did not move a muscle. He became a log in the creek, his breathing shallow, his eyes tracking the canopy through a narrow gap in the ferns. The jungle performed its normal symphony, but beneath it now ran a new current, a silent, predatory awareness. The remaining snipers were adjusting. He could feel it in the quality of the silence. His original position was burned. To stay was to die. But to move was to risk triggering the peripheral vision of a man 300 yards away, staring through his own scope. He formulated a plan that was less a maneuver and more a geological process. He would move not like a soldier but like a shadow shifting with the sun infinitesimally slow, using the natural cover of the creek bank's undercut. He inched backward, an inch every few minutes, pushing with his toes, the rifle cradled in his arms. It was a test of nerve over physiology. Cramps seized his legs. Fire ants, disturbed from their nest, swarmed over his left hand. He endured the burning bites without a flinch. A single jerk of his arm would be a flag. It took him 57 minutes to traverse 15 feet into the deeper shadow of a giant mossy root system. The new position offered slightly better concealment, but a more restricted field of view. He was trading visibility for survival. He carefully raised his head, bringing the scope to his eye once more. The grid search began again, but the parameters had changed before. He was looking for a hunter fixated on the marine lines. Now, he was looking for a hunter who might also be looking for him. He focused on areas that provided a panoramic view of the terrain behind the American perimeter places. where a sniper could watch for a lone man moving in the jungle. He was no longer searching for prey. He was searching for a mirror, and then he saw it. A subtle, tell-tale absence. High on a ridgeline to his left, a thick curtain of hanging lianas and ferns showed a small, unnatural gap. It was a sniper's lanaya-cleared tunnel of vegetation to provide a clear field of fire. From the marine lines, it would be invisible. From his oblique angle, it was a black thread in the tapestry. Someone had carefully trimmed the foliage to create a firing port, and where there was a firing port, there was a rifle. Where there was a rifle, there was a man. The range was extreme, an estimated 400 yards, uphill, through shifting heat haze for a standard-issue M1 Garand. It was a hopeless shot. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. For Fulcher zeroed Springfield and his understanding of ballistics, it was merely difficult. But the shot was only half the problem. Between him and that ridge lay 200 yards of open kunai grass, dotted with shell holes. To get a stable shooting position for such a long shot, he would have to move. Again, he was caught in a brutal calculus, remain concealed but ineffective, or risk exposure for a low percentage shot at a target he could barely see. The machine gun fire from earlier proved they were willing to saturate an area if he fired and missed. They would paint this entire sector with lead. He made his choice. He began to crawl. The kunai grass was a world of blades. Each stem was edged like a razor, slicing at his hands, face, and uniform as he crawled. It was not a field. It was a minefield of paper cuts that stung with sweat and filth. He moved with the agonizing slowness of a predator stalking sleep, distributing his weight to avoid snapping twigs or rustling the grass in a wave. Every few feet he would freeze, ear-tuned for any change in the jungle's drone that signaled alarm. His objective was a shallow shell crater 150 yards out. It offered a depression for cover and a mound of packed earth at its forward edge, a perfect rifle rest. The distance was a gauntlet. He was a beetle crossing a plate under the eyes of 10 hidden giants. A sound, alien and mechanical, cut through the natural noise. The distinct clack of a bolt action rifle being worked. It was close. Too close. Not from the ridge, but from his right flank, perhaps 80 yards away in a dense thicket of bamboo. He hadn't seen a lane there. He had missed one. The sound meant one of two things. A sniper had seen movement in the grass and was chambering around to engage. Or he had been distracted, shifting position, and had casually cycled his bolt. The difference was the difference between life and death. Fulcher melted into the earth, his face pressed into the dirt, willing his body to become a shadow. He did not turn his head. Peripheral vision was his only tool. He stared at a single blade of grass 2 inches from his eye, his entire being focused on listening. A minute passed, 2. No shot came. The jungle sounds resumed, unchanged. It had been an administrative cycle, not a tactical one. The sniper was likely repositioning within his hide, utterly unaware of the man crawling through the grass below him. The realization was not comforting. It meant Fulcher was now in the middle of an overlapping field of fire between the sniper on the ridge and an unseen shooter to his right. He was in the kill box. The calculus was now insane. Continue forward to the shell hole, expose himself to take the 400-yard shot at the ridge, and likely reveal his position to the closer sniper. Or try to locate and engage the closer threat first, losing his chance at the ridge target and potentially starting a firefight he couldn't win. He made a third choice. He would use the first to find the second. He resumed his crawl toward the shell hole, every nerve screaming that a rifle was pointed at his back. He reached the crater and slid into its cool, muddy bottom. He was now committed. He arranged his body, packed a small mound of dirt under his rifle's forestock, and settled the crosshairs on the dark gap in the foliage 400 yards away. He took a breath, let it half out, and began the slow, steady pressure on the trigger. He was not aiming at a man. He was aiming at a shadow in a window. He fired. The rifle's report was a flat, hard slap against the hillside. In his scope, Fulcher saw a violent spray of shredded leaves and splinters erupt from the sniper's lane. A sharp, metallic ping echoed back the sound of a bullet striking a rifle's metal receiver or scope. He did not see a body fall. He had seen the impact, but not the result. A miss, a wound. He couldn't know. He had gambled a precious round in his position on a ghost. But the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. From the thicket of bamboo to his right, the source of the bolt. Click, a muzzle flash bloomed. A bullet snapped past his head. So close he felt its pressure wave. The closer sniper had seen his muzzle flash or the movement in the crater. Fulcher was now in a direct close-range duel. He worked the bolt of his Springfield in a fluid, practiced motion, ejecting the smoking brass. He did not try to re-aim at the distant ridge. He swung the rifle toward the bamboo thicket. His scope, useless at this range, was a blur of green. He dropped his eye to the iron sights mounted on the rifle's receiver. At 80 yards through grass and thin bamboo, he saw a flicker of movement, a sliver of khaki. He fired from the hip. An instinctive snapshot meant not to kill, but to suppress. The Japanese riflemen fired again simultaneously. Fulcher felt a searing hot tug at the sleeve of his jacket, and a line of fire opened along his upper arm. The bullet had grazed him. In the crater, he rolled violently to his left, as a third round smacked into the mud where his head had been. He was wounded, pinned, and outgunned. The enemy shooter had a bolt-action rifle as well, but he held the superior position, concealed in deep cover. Fulcher was in a shallow hole. The next shot would find him. Standard doctrine screamed for grenades, or a squad assault. He had none of that. He had 5 seconds of life remaining. His mind clicked over into a cold operational mode. The enemy had fired 3 times. He would be working his bolt. For a 2-second window, that sniper's eye would be off Fulcher, focused on the mechanical task of chambering the next round. It was the only window he would get. Fulcher did not rise to shoot. He shoved the muzzle of his Springfield over the crater's lip, pointing roughly toward the thicket. He took a deep breath, and then screamed a raw, guttural, dying man's scream of agony. He thrashed in the crater, kicking up mud and grass. He was selling a performance, the performance of a mortally wounded soldier in his final throes. In the bamboo, the movement would stop. The sniper would hear the scream, see the convulsing. He would believe his shot had been lethal. He would take his time. He would aim carefully for the coup de grace. He would expose himself to ensure the kill. Fulcher lay still, one eye cracked open, his rifle held in a death grip, its muzzle still aimed. He waited for the hunter to become the target. The silence that followed his scream was a vacuum. 5 seconds, 10. The only sound was the thundering of his own heart in his ears. Had it worked, or was the sniper simply waiting, too disciplined to fall for the ruse? The burning line on his arm pulsed with pain, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Thin movement, a careful, deliberate parting of bamboo stalks 80 yards away, a helmet, then the upper half of a face, one eye squinted shut behind the long barrel of an Arisaka rifle. The sniper was taking his final, confirming aim. He was exposed from the chest up, believing his target was helpless in the crater. Fulcher's body was coiled like a spring. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. In one motion, he rolled up onto his left elbow, bringing the rifle's iron sights to his eye. The movement was fast, but controlled. The Japanese sniper, realizing the deception, began to shift his own aim. It was a race, measured in fractions of a second. Fulcher's front sight post settled on the center of the exposed khaki tunic. There was no time for a breath, no time for perfect alignment. He trusted his instinct, the 1,000 hours of muscle memory from the Missouri hills. He squeezed the trigger, the Springfield roared, the recoil slammed into his wounded shoulder. A white-hot spike of fresh agony through the smoke. He saw the impact. The figure in the bamboo jerked backwards as if hit by a sledgehammer, disappearing into the thicket. There was no second shot. Fulcher collapsed back into the crater, gasping. He had won the duel, but the cost was immense. He was now bleeding. His position was violently compromised by 2 separate gunfights, and the sound of this latest engagement would have drawn the attention of every remaining enemy in the sector. He was a beacon. He fumbled a field dressing from his pouch and clumsily wrapped his bleeding arm, pulling the gauze tight with his teeth. The pain was clarifying. He had eliminated 2, possibly 3 of the 11. But he had also burned through his most precious resource, anonymity. He was no longer a ghost in their machine. He was a specific, locatable problem. The remaining snipers would now be communicating, triangulating. They would know a single, highly skilled American rifleman was operating behind their own lines. The hunt would become a coordinated counter-hunt. He checked his ammunition. He had fired 4 rounds. He had 36 left. It was enough, in theory, to kill every remaining sniper 3 times over. In reality, it was a pittance. Each shot now carried exponentially greater risk. He had to move, not just to a new firing position, but out of the entire sector. He had to vanish again. But the ridge sniper, had he killed him? The metallic ping suggested a hit on equipment. A wounded, angry sniper with a damaged scope was still a lethal threat. And that sniper had the high ground with a commanding view of the area Fulcher needed to cross to escape. He had to know he had to risk one more look. Fulcher knew that looking was a luxury he could not afford. To raise his head above the crater's rim now was to invite a shot from a dozen unseen angles. But ignorance was a slower, more certain death. If the sniper on the ridge was still active, that 400-yard lane commanded the entire valley of Kunai Grash's, only feasible escape route back to Marine lines. To move without knowing was to walk into a bullet. He devised a primitive periscope. Using his knife, he cut a long, straight stem of kunai grass. He carefully fixed his Marine Corps issue helmet to the top of the stem with a wrap of dampened adhesive tape from his dressing packet. It was a crude, trembling mock-up of a man's head and shoulders. With agonizing slowness, he raised the stem at the crater's edge, tilting it to mimic a cautious soldier peering over. The reaction was instantaneous. A single shot cracked from the ridge. The bullet struck 3 feet to the left of the helmet, kicking up a fountain of black soil. A miss, but it confirmed everything. The sniper was alive, alert, and his position was unchanged. The ping Fulcher had heard was likely a bullet gouging the sniper's rifle stock or scope mount, a terrifying near miss that had left the man shaken but fully functional. Now that sniper was waiting, furious, his patience honed to a razor's edge, for the real head to appear. Fulcher lowered the decoy. He was trapped. The crater was a temporary refuge, but it was also a grave waiting to be filled. He had no water. His wound needed proper attention. The sun was climbing, baking the moisture from the ground, turning the air into a suffocating blanket. He could not wait for nightfall. Infection and dehydration would weaken him past the point of effective action. He analyzed the shot. It had been placed to the left of his decoy. Why? Perhaps the sniper, shooting downhill through heat haze, had misjudged the wind, or perhaps his scope had been knocked slightly off, 0 by Fulcher's round. A damaged scope meant compromised accuracy. It was a tiny fracture in the enemy's perfection. It presented a horrific opportunity. The only way to break the siege was to eliminate the sniper on the ridge. To do that, he needed a stable shooting position outside this crater, one that offered a clear line of sight. But every inch of open ground was under that sniper's observation. There was, however, a blind spot directly at the base of the ridge itself, in the dead ground where the sniper's angle was too steep to see. If he could reach the base of that hill, he would be invisible to the man above. It meant crawling 250 yards through open grass directly toward the enemy's position, under the very rifle that was hunting him. It was tactical suicide, but it was also the last thing the sniper would expect. No one advances toward a confirmed sniper's nest. Everyone retreats. Fulcher's only remaining weapon was the enemy's expectation of human logic. He checked his rifle, wiped the sweat from his brow, and began to crawl. Not back towards safety, not to the side for cover, straight toward the ridge. The crawl toward the ridge was a descent into a new kind of hell. The kunai grass gave way to thicker, coarser undergrowth studded with volcanic rock that tore at his knees and palms. Each forward motion was a calculated risk of noise and exposure. He moved not in a straight line, but in a slow, zigzag pattern, exploiting every fold in the earth, every shell hole, every patch of ferns. He was a worm inching toward the foot of a giant. His mind operated on 2 levels. One, animal and raw, screamed at the pain in his arm, the thirst clawing his throat, the suffocating heat. The other was a cold, detached calculator, measuring distance, wind, and the psychology of the man above. The sniper would be scanning the middle distance, the obvious avenues of escape. His focus would be outward, toward the Marine lines. Not directly downward at his own doorstep. It was a fundamental sniper's bias. The threat is always over there. After an hour, Fulcher reached the base of the ridge. A steep, muddy slope rose at a 60-degree angle, tangled with roots and dripping moss. He was now in the dead ground. The sniper could not see him unless he leaned directly over the cliff edge, a suicidal exposure. But Fulcher could not see the sniper either. To engage, he would have to climb. He stashed his pack and extra ammunition in a crevice, keeping only his rifle and 3 stripper clips. The climb was a silent, vertical battle. He used roots for handholds, testing each one for rot before putting his weight on it. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. And here is the answer to the question I asked you earlier. What was Fulcher's single, misunderstood advantage? It wasn't just his rifle, It was his mindset. While the entire Marine Corps was thinking in terms of volume suppressing fire and frontal assault, Fulcher was thinking in terms of precision. He understood that in this new, vertical jungle, the enemy wasn't an army in a line, but a pathology in the canopy. You couldn't suppress what you couldn't see. The only tool that could possibly work was a single perfect shot. His so-called hunting rifle and the hunter's patience it demanded weren't liabilities. They were the only solution. The rulebook said to send a machine, the jungle demanded a surgeon. That was the advantage no one else saw. Dislodged pebbles skittered down the slope. Each sound was a pistol shot in his ears. He moved upward at a diagonal, seeking the lip of the sniper's position from an oblique angle. 20 feet from the top, he stopped. He could hear voices, muffled, low, Japanese. Not one man, two. His intelligence had been wrong, or the position had been reinforced. The ridge hosted a sniper team, a shooter and a spotter. The odds had just doubled. The spotter would likely be armed with a pistol or a rifle himself. They would have grenades. Assaulting a two-man position from below, with a bolt-action rifle and a wounded arm, was not a fight, it was an executionist's own. A rational man would retreat. He had already exceeded any conceivable expectation. 2 confirmed kills, a third possibly wounded. He could slip back into the dead ground and try to exfiltrate under cover of darkness. But the ridge was the key from this vantage. The sniper team controlled the battlefield. As long as they lived, they would continue to kill Marines. They would also be the central node in the counter-hunt for Fulcher himself. Leaving them alive meant surrendering the initiative. It meant his entire mission had been for nothing. He had one advantage: they did not know he was here. They believed the American sniper was still in the valley below, trapped or dead. Their attention would be forward. He needed to turn their position into a trap of his own. He carefully, silently, unsheathed his combat knife. He would need to get close, intimate. He began the final few feet of the climb, not toward the firing lane, but to a point 5 yards to its side, where the jungle began to reclaim the ridgetop. He would emerge not in front of them, but beside them. The last route, he pulled himself over the lip, rolling silently into a bed of damp ferns. He was now on the same topographic plane as the hunters. 20 feet away, through a screen of leaves, he could see the back of a helmet, the curve of a shoulder. The spotter, the shooter, would be just beyond, lying prone. Fulcher rose to a crouch, knife in his left hand, his wounded right arm hanging useless. He took one step, then another. A twig snapped under his boot. The sound was catastrophic, a dry, sharp crack in the moist air. The Japanese spotter's head snapped around. His eyes, wide with shock and disbelief, locked onto Fulcher, a mud, smeared, bleeding apparition that had materialized inside their sanctum. For a frozen half-second, the world stopped. The spotter's mouth opened, not to shout, but to draw breath for the alarm. Fulcher was already moving. Rational thought was gone, replaced by a predator's kinetics. He lunged forward, his bad arm screaming in protest as he drove the knife. It was not a precision stab. It was a desperate full-body thrust. The blade struck high on the man's chest, grating against a rib before plunging deeper. The spotter's cry died in a wet gurgle. He clutched at Fulcher, his hands scrabbling at the Marine's uniform. From the prone position just ahead, the sniper heard the struggle. He began to roll over, his hands leaving his rifle, fumbling for a sidearm or a grenade. Fulcher, still entangled with the dying spotter, wrenched the knife free. He shoved the collapsing body toward the sniper, a tangle of limbs to buy a heartbeat of time. He dropped the knife. There was no time for another strike. His right hand found the pistol grip of his Springfield, still slung across his back. He could not shoulder it, not in this close quarters chaos. He brought the rifle up like a club, grasping the forestock, and swung the steel-shod butt in a vicious, short arc. The sniper, half-risen, took the blow across the temple. There was a sickening, hollow sound. He crumpled sideways. Fulcher stood over the two men, chest heaving. The coppery smell of blood thick in the air. The spotter was dead. The sniper lay still, a deep, pulsing gash on his head. Unconscious or dying, the violence had taken less than 10 seconds. It had been silent, save for the thuds and the choked breath. But to Fulcher, it echoed like an artillery barrage. He stood trembling, adrenaline crashing through him in nauseating waves. He had just fought a knife fight on a mountain ridge, with a bullet wound in his arm, and won. The absurdity of it threatened to overwhelm him. He had to move. The rest of the ridge could be manned. He quickly searched the position. The sniper's Arisaka had a long, pristine scope, but the stock was freshly gouged the scar from his 400-yard shot. He had missed the man by inches. He took the sniper's canteen and drank deeply, the tepid water tasting like life itself. He pocketed a handful of rice crackers and a map case. Then he looked at the unconscious sniper. The man was still breathing. The military imperative was clear: ensure the enemy is no longer a threat. The human cost of this mission was already written on his soul. He looked at the man's face, young, pale under the grime. He made a decision he would question for the rest of his life. He did not fire his pistol. He did not use his knife. He picked up the Arisaka rifle, walked to the edge of the ridge overlooking the Japanese rear areas, and hurled it as far as he could into the dense jungle below. He then dragged the unconscious man to the same edge and rolled him down the steep, muddy slope. It was a 50-foot drop into thick vegetation. Survival was unlikely, but it was not an execution. He had silenced the ridge. He now owned the high ground. But he was more alone than ever, standing atop a peak in enemy territory, the evidence of close-quarters combat at his feet. The clock was ticking. The absence of communication from this key position would soon be noticed. From this new vantage, he glassed the jungle below. The battlefield was laid out like a map, and through his scope, he saw something that turned his blood-cold movement. Not random, coordinated. Small teams of Japanese infantry, perhaps 4 or 5 men each, were beginning to converge, like bloodhounds on a scent toward the areas of his earlier engagements. The hunt was officially over the counter. Assault had begun. The high ground was no longer an advantage. It was a spotlight. From the ridge, Fulcher could see the closing pattern 3 separate fire teams, moving with purpose, converging on the kunai field and the bamboo thicket where he had left bodies. They were methodical, sweeping the area. They would find the crater, they would find his blood trail. It was only a matter of time before they looked up. His path back to Marine lines was now cut off. The valley was crawling with hunters. His only remaining direction was deeper into Japanese held territory west, across the spine of the island. It was the direction of no return. But survival for even another hour demanded movement. He took one last scan of the jungle below, memorizing the positions of the search teams. Then he melted back from the ridgeline, descending the far western slope either side, facing away from his own lines. The descent was a controlled fall, sliding on mud, grabbing at saplings. Every rustle of leaves felt like a broadcast of his location. He reached the relative cover of the lower jungle on the enemy's side of the ridge. The sound of the search teams was muffled now behind the hill. He was in a new world. The trails here were more defined. The jungle slightly less choke signs of regular enemy use. He moved parallel to a trail, staying 20 yards inside the tree line, his rifle at the ready. His objective had catastrophically shifted. He was no longer hunting snipers. He was evading an infantry cordon. The mission had failed in its original scope, yet succeeded in a brutal, temporary sense. The killing from the canopy had stopped, for now, but if he was caught or killed, the snipers would return to their perches by tomorrow. His work would be erased. He needed to accomplish 2 impossible things: survive and continue to degrade the enemy's sniper capability. The only way to do both was to keep killing, but on his terms, as a ghost once more. He needed to find a place to hide, to let the immediate search pass, and then resume his work from an entirely unexpected quarter. He found it in a nightmare 100 yards ahead. The jungle opened into a small, swampy clearing dominated by the colossal skeletal remains of a banyan tree toppled by artillery. Its root mass formed a cave-like hollow, partly submerged in black, stagnant water. It stank of rot and decay. It was a place of disease and suffocation, and it was perfect. He waded into the foul water, the cold a shock to his system. He pushed through hanging roots into the dark cavity beneath the trunk. The space was tight, claustrophobic, alive with the skittering of insects. He would have to stand in water up to his waist, but it offered concealment on all sides and a narrow firing port through a gap in the roots, looking back toward the trailhead just paralleled. He settled in, the water leaching the heat from his body. He loaded a fresh stripper clip into the Springfield, the metallic ching deafening in the hollow silence. He was a trap, set in the enemy's backyard. He didn't have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, a Japanese patrol sergeant and 3 men appeared on the trail. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. They were not searching meticulously, they were moving with the brisk purpose of men reinforcing a line or responding to the commotion on the far side of the ridge. They passed within 30 yards of his hiding place. Oblivious Fulcher held his fire. They were not his primary target. Killing them would only solidify his location for the tightening cordon. He let them pass. His patience was a physical ache. Then, he saw what he was waiting for. 15 minutes after the patrol, two figures emerged from the jungle on the opposite side of the clearing. They moved differently slower, more deliberately, carrying long rifles. They wore the loose, foliage-covered uniforms of snipers, not standard infantry. They were likely displacing from positions to the north, moving to new hides after the day's disruption. They were heading straight for his swamp. They stopped at the edge of the water, talking in low tones, pointing. One of them gestured toward the fallen tree. They were considering it as a possible position for the next day's hunt. They were now standing still, outlined against the greener jungle behind them. Range 70 yards. An easy shot for a rested rifleman. But Fulcher was standing in cold water, his injured arm trembling with fatigue, his body shaking with the onset of shock. The root column restricted his movement. He had one chance before they either saw him or moved on. He had to make the shot count. They stopped at the edge of the water, talking in low tones, pointing. One of them gestured toward the fallen tree. They were considering it as a possible position for the next day's hunt. They were now standing still, outlined against the greener jungle behind them. Range 70 yards. An easy shot for a rested rifleman. But Fulcher was standing in cold water, his injured arm trembling. Fulcher's world collapsed to the circle of his scope. The water's cold was a vibration in his bones, threatening to jitter the crosshairs off target. He focused on the biomechanics of the shot, the solid anchor of the root against his forestock, the slow exhale, the seamless take-up of trigger pressure. He aimed for the thoracic cavity of the lead sniper. A center mass shot was less likely to miss. Due to his own shivering, he fired. The report was muffled by the dense, wet wood of his hide. The first sniper dropped as if his strings were cut, falling backward into the ferns. The second man froze for a microsecond, not in panic, but in trained assessment. His head snapped toward the sound, not toward the tree, but slightly to its left, where the echo had bounced. He was already bringing his rifle up, his movements terrifyingly efficient. Fulcher worked the bolt, the spent casing arced out, plinking into the black water. He chambered a new round. The second sniper was now moving laterally, fast, using the foliage for cover, trying to triangulate the hidden shooter. He did not fire blindly, he was hunting. Fulcher lost sight of him. The man had vanished into the undergrowth. A minute passed. Then, too, the only sound was the buzzing of flies, already finding the first body. Fulcher remained absolutely still, his rifle trained on the last place he'd seen movement. The sniper was out there, doing exactly what Fulcher had done for hours, waiting for a mistake. This was the duel at its purest. Two masters of patience and concealment, separated by 80 yards of swamp and rotten wood. The difference was, one was standing in a cold pond, bleeding, his position now vaguely known. The other was mobile, healthy, and angry. A flicker, a slight trembling of a fern leaf inconsistent with the still air. He was there, creeping to Fulcher's right, trying to flank the tree. Fulcher tracked the movement with the tip of his barrel, but he had no shot. The man was using the jungle like a cloak, then, a calculated risk. The Japanese sniper spoke, a single, low, clear word in English, aimed at the tree. Marine, it was a probe, a psychological weapon. He knew Fulcher was in there. He was trying to trigger a reaction, a shift, a glance, a shot at a sound. Fulcher did not bite. He stopped breathing, becoming part of the rot. His finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not the trigger. To squeeze now would be to fire at a ghost and reveal his exact firing port. The silence stretched, the sniper tried again. He threw a small rock. It landed in the water 10 feet from Fulcher's hide, with a loud plop. The ripples spread outward. A classic diversion, the shot, when it came, would not be from where the rock was thrown. Fulcher knew the playbook. He ignored the ripples. He kept his scope fixed on the kill zone he had pre-selected, the clearest lane of approach to his position. He waited for the hunter to enter the frame. He did. The sniper, believing the Marine had taken the bait and looked toward the splash, rose from a crouch to advance. He was exposed for less than a second, moving between two palms. Fulcher's crosshairs found him. He fired. The bullet took the man high in the shoulder, spinning him around. It was not a killing shot. The sniper cried out, staggered, but did not fall. He disappeared again into the green, wounded but still lethal. Now Fulcher had a wounded, cornered, and supremely dangerous predator just outside his door, and that man knew exactly where the door was. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. The Japanese sniper was now bleeding, in pain, and trapped between his enemy and the open swamp. His discipline would be fraying, replaced by the primal imperative to kill or be killed. For Fulcher, the calculus was bleak. He could not stay in the waterlogged root cellar. The wounded man would either wait him out, call for reinforcements using a whistle or signal, or, in a final act of desperation, rush the position with a grenade. Fulcher had to move first, but to leave his cover was to step into the line of fire of a man who had just proven his skill. He had one advantage: he knew the man was wounded in the right shoulder. His rifle aiming capability would be severely degraded. He might switch to his sidearm or attempt to use his rifle left-handed. Either option meant reduced accuracy at any range beyond point-blank. Fulcher made a decision that skirted madness. He would not flee silently. He would create a storm. He quietly loaded his last 2 stripper clips, bringing his total remaining rounds to 15. He then took the canteen head captured from the ridge, now half full. He placed it on a root at the opposite end of his hiding place from his firing port. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves for the performance. He shouted, a raw, angry scream in English. "Come on, come and get it!" He then slapped the water hard with his free hand, creating a loud splash near the canteen. Simultaneously, he exploded from his hiding place at the firing port end, a mere 3 feet away, but a world apart in terms of sound origin. He did not rise to shoot. He rose to move, lunging out of the water and rolling into the cover of a thick fern bank. The reaction was instantaneous. 2 shots cracked from the sniper's position. Both bullets smacked into the root mass near the canteen, right where Fulcher's diversion had suggested he was. The sniper had taken the bait. Now Fulcher had his location pinpointed. The sniper was behind a moss-covered log 30 yards to Fulcher's left front, and he had just revealed himself with 2 muzzle flashes. Fulcher rose to a kneeling position behind the ferns. He saw the top of the man's helmet, the glint of a rifle barrel resting on the log. The sniper was hurriedly working his bolt left-handed, the motion awkward and pained. He was vulnerable for 3 full seconds. Fulcher aimed. This shot had to end it. He placed the crosshairs just above the log, centering on the helmet. He exhaled, fired. The helmet jerked backward and disappeared. No further movement. Fulcher didn't wait for confirmation. He was up and running, not toward the body, but away at a right angle, crashing through the jungle in a desperate, noisy sprint. Stealth was no longer an option. Speed and chaos were his only allies. The gunfire would have been a beacon to every enemy patrol within half a mile. He ran for 5 minutes, a burning, gasping eternity, until his lungs felt like shrapnel. He collapsed behind a towering buttress root. Listening, he could hear distant shouts now, converging from multiple directions, drawn to the sound of the final engagement. They were close. Too close. He was deep in enemy territory, exhausted, wounded, with perhaps a dozen rounds left. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The snipers were dead or scattered, but he had awakened the entire hornet's nest. His original mission was accomplished in the most technical, bloody sense. But the war for his own life had just entered its final desperate phase. There was only one path left, and it was the worst one of all: to have any chance of seeing the American lines again. He would have to do what no soldier ever wants to do: go to ground and let the enemy walk past him. He would have to find a hole, climb into it, and become part of the earth while boots crunched inches from his head. He scanned the jungle floor, his vision swimming with fatigue. There, partially covered by a fallen palm frond, was a narrow animal burrow or erosion ditch, just deep enough to hold his body if he curled tight. It was a grave waiting to be filled. He slid into it, pulling the frond and handfuls of rotting leaves over himself. He clutched his rifle to his chest, a final, useless comfort. He could already hear the thrashing of vegetation. The hunters were here. The world shrank to the space beneath the palm frond. The smell was of wet soil, decay, and his own fear. Boots, heavy and urgent, crunched through the leaf litter. Voices, sharp and guttural, called to each other in Japanese. A pair of boots stopped so close to his hiding place that he could see the cracked leather and dried mud on the soles. He held his breath, his heart a frantic drum against the earth. The soldier above him shifted his weight. He was scanning, his rifle sweeping the area. Fulcher could see the man's calves, the frayed edge of his uniform. A drop of sweat traced a path from Fulcher's temple into his eye. A burning sting. He did not blink. To move an eyelid felt like enough to betray him. The soldier muttered something, then turned and crashed away, following the calls of his comrades moving toward the swamp. The immediate threat passed, but the danger was metastasizing. They were establishing a search grid. They would be back, more systematically. Fulcher waited in his shallow grave for what felt like an hour, measuring time by the slow crawl of insects across his neck. The shouts grew more distant, then fragmented. The jungle's normal noise began to tentatively return a bird call. The cicadas. It was now or never. He emerged from the ditch like something being born from the ground, slow and covered in filth. Every joint screamed in protest. He oriented himself by a sliver of late-afternoon sun, piercing the canopy. The American lines were east, back through the valley, now swarming with enemy patrols. It was a death sentence. He chose the only vector left, north toward the coast. Intelligence suggested Japanese defenses were thinner along the steep coastal bluffs. It was a longer route over more difficult terrain, but it might offer a slim corridor of neglect. The next hours were a twilight dream of pain and persistence. He moved like a ghost, avoiding trails, wading through streams to mask his scent and trail. His arm was a throbbing mass of fire. Dehydration clawed at his throat. He existed in a narrow tunnel of focus. Find the next piece of cover. Take the next silent step. As dusk bled into the deep blue of early night, he reached the lip of a coastal bluff below. The black expanse of the Bismarck Sea churned against razor-sharp coral. To his left, perhaps a mile down the coast, he could see the faint, scattered fires of the marine perimeter. Safety, an impossible gulf of enemy. Held jungle and beach still lay between him and those fires. He was at the limit, his body was shutting down. He had no food, little water, and his ammunition was a weight he could barely lift. To attempt the coastal crawl in the dark was to risk falling from the bluffs, walking into an enemy patrol, or being shot by his own sentries who would fire at any movement. He found a crevice in the coral rock, a shallow cave smelling of salt and seabirds. He crawled into its absolute darkness. This was the end of his movement here. He would either regain enough strength to make a final dash at dawn, or he would die of exhaustion and infection. There was no more cunning plan, no more tactical brilliance. Only the animal will to see the sunrise. He drifted in a feverish haze, the day's violence replaying in jarring fragments. The first body falling from the tree, the bolt. Action click in the bamboo, the knife-striking bone, the wounded sniper's voice calling Marine from the green wall. He had set out to hunt 11 men. He had accounts for 5 confirmed, 1 probable on the ridge, and 2 in the swamp. The math was irrelevant. The cost was absolute. As the first gray light of the 22nd of January touched the horizon, a new sound pulled him from his stupor. Not jungle sounds, not Japanese, the distant, rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. American boots, a patrol. Moving along the beach below his bluff, he tried to call out. His voice was a dry rasp, lost in the wind and surf. He tried to stand. His legs buckled, he was 100 yards from salvation, and he was too broken to reach it. He did the only thing he had left. He raised his rifle, the once mock toy, toward the lightening sky. He pointed it away from the patrol, toward the sea. He fired his last round. The final shot was a dying man's flary, a single, desperate punctuation mark in the dawn's silence. On the beach below, the Marine patrol froze. Every man hit the deck, rifles snapping up toward the bluffs. The sound had come from above them, from Japanese-held territory. But it was an American weapon-distinct report of a .30-06 Springfield, not the sharper crack of an Arisaka. The patrol leader, a veteran sergeant, made a connection no textbook offered. For 2 days, the paralyzing sniper fire from the groves had ceased. Rumors had circulated of a lone rifleman sent into the green hell. He signaled his men to hold fire up there. He hissed, pointing to the rocky cleft. They found him 10 minutes later, not a triumphant warrior, but a broken figure curled in a fissure, caked in dried blood, mud, and filth. His eyes glazed with fever. The once beautiful Winchester was lying across his lap, its scope fogged, its stock scarred. He could barely lift his head. They thought he was a Japanese soldier in captured gear until he whispered his name, rank, and regiment. They gently pried the empty rifle from his grip and carried him down the bluff. As they moved back through the contested ground toward the perimeter, no shots came from the trees. The canopy was silent. PFC John Fulcher's solo mission lasted less than 4 hours. In that time, he had irrevocably altered the tactical reality of his sector. Post-action analysis and later reconnaissance would confirm 11 Japanese sniper positions neutralized, a combination of confirmed kills, abandoned equipment in high hides, and the disruption of their coordinated network. He had not just removed shooters, he had shattered a system of terror. He was evacuated to a field hospital where he survived blood poisoning from his infected wound. The Marines who had scoffed at his rifle now handled it with a kind of reverence. The toy was shipped back to the States, eventually finding a home in a museum, a relic of a moment when the machine of modern warfare stalled, and it fell to one man with an anachronistic tool to solve a problem that volume could not. Fulcher received the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. He would carry the psychological wounds long after the physical ones healed, the face of the man on the ridge and the voice in the swamp visiting him in dreams for decades. The battle for Cape Gloucester ground on a brutal campaign of attrition, but in one sector, for one battalion, the ghost in the trees had been exorcised. The lesson was written not in doctrine but in blood and empirical result. Sometimes the weapon that wins the war is not the one that fires the fastest, but the one that aims the truest. And sometimes victory is not about holding ground, but about silencing the shot that makes men afraid to stand upon it. History insists what John Fulcher did should not have been possible, that a single man with a bolt-action rifle could walk into a prepared killing zone and defeat 11 specialized enemies defies every rule of warfare. But history is not written by rules. It is written in the fragile, brutal moments when all logic fails, and everything comes down to one shot, one breath, and the unbearable weight of the trigger. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe for more.